stood at the edge of the grand dining hall, my fingers trembling around the stem of a wine glass, the chatter of 50 guests swirling around me like a storm I couldn't escape. The chandelier above cast a golden glow, illuminating the faces of people I barely knew, business partners, distant cousins, family friends who wore their wealth like a second skin. My mother, Ellen, had insisted on this party, a lavish celebration for her 50th birthday, and somehow, I'd been roped into every detail without ever agreeing to it. The planning, the guest list, the menu, all of it had been thrust upon me, a burden I carried silently because that's what daughters do. Or so I thought. My name is Clara, and at 28, I believed I'd learned how to navigate my family's expectations, their subtle manipulations, their way of making me feel small while smiling for the world. But that night, as the clock struck 9 and the room turned to face me, I realized I hadn't learned enough. The humiliation that unfolded would crack open the truth about the people I called family, and it would set me on a path I never imagined toward justice, toward revenge, toward something resembling redemption. The evening began innocently enough. I'd spent weeks organizing this event, poring over details to meet my mother's impossible standards. The floral arrangements had to be peonies, not roses, because roses were too pedestrian. The wine had to be a 2015 Bordeaux. No exceptions. The guest list was a minefield of egos, each name carefully curated to reflect the family's status. My mother had always been the architect of our family's image, a woman who could smile through her teeth while orchestrating chaos behind the scenes. My father, Richard, was her silent partner, nodding along to her whims while pretending to be the reasonable one. My older sister, Vanessa, was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Her law degree and polished charm a constant reminder of my own perceived shortcomings. I was the quiet one, the one who fixed things, who cleaned up their messes without asking for credit. But that night, I wasn't prepared for the mess they'd make of me. As the guests mingled, I caught my mother's eye across the room. She was radiant in her emerald gown, her laughter ringing out as she clinked glasses with a man I vaguely recognized as a local politician. I forced a smile, hoping for a nod of approval, a sign that I'd done well. Instead, she beckoned me over with a flick of her wrist, her expression unreadable. I navigated through the crowd, my heart pounding with a familiar mix of hope and dread. When I reached her, she pulled me close, her perfume overwhelming. "Clara, darling," she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You've outdone yourself. This party is almost perfect." The word almost hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. I felt the eyes of strangers on me, their curiosity prickling my skin. "Almost?" I asked, keeping my tone light, though my stomach twisted. She laughed, a sound that cut like glass. "Well, the appetizers are a touch underwhelming, don't you think? And the seating chart, did you really think the Morgans should be so far from the head table?" The guests around us chuckled, their laughter a chorus of judgment. I opened my mouth to respond, to explain that she'd approved every detail. But she waved me off. "Don't worry, dear. We'll fix it next time. If there is a next time." The room seemed to tilt. I stood there, frozen, as the politician smirked and my mother turned away, already charming someone new. Vanessa appeared at my side, her smile as sharp as a blade. "Oh, Clara, don't take it personally," she whispered, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You know how Mom gets when things aren't perfect. Maybe you should have double-checked the menu." I wanted to scream that I'd spent hours confirming every detail, that I'd sacrificed my own time, my own sanity, to make this night flawless. But I didn't. I never did. Instead, I excused myself, retreating to the hallway where the noise of the party dulled to a hum. My hands shook as I leaned against the wall, the weight of their words pressing down on me. It wasn't just the criticism, it was the way they'd orchestrated it, turning me into a spectacle for their amusement. I was their scapegoat, their punching bag, and they'd made sure everyone saw it. As I stood there, trying to steady my breathing, I overheard two guests whispering nearby. Ellen's daughter. The quiet one's always been a bit of a disappointment, hasn't she? One said. The other laughed softly. You'd think she'd try harder. With a family like that. The words burned, searing into the part of me that had always wondered if I was enough. I spent my life trying to prove I was. But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough for them. Not for my mother, who saw me as an extension of her own ambitions. Not for my father, who barely noticed me unless I failed. Not for Vanessa, who thrived on my missteps. But something shifted in me that night, a spark of anger igniting beneath the hurt. I wasn't just going to take it anymore. I wasn't going to let them define me. I returned to the party, my face a mask of composure. But inside, I was plotting. I'd always been the one to fix their messes, to know their secrets, to see the cracks in their perfect facade. My mother's affairs, my father's shady business deals, Vanessa's carefully hidden scandals, I knew them all. For years, I kept their secrets, out of loyalty, out of fear. But loyalty is a fragile thing, and mine was breaking. As I moved through the crowd, smiling politely, I began to see the party not as my failure, but as their stage. They thought they could humiliate me and walk away unscathed. They were wrong. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I played my part, refilling glasses, making small talk, all while my mind churned. I noticed the way my mother's laughter grew sharper as the night wore on, the way my father's eyes lingered too long on the young caterer, the way Vanessa flirted with a married man in plain view. They were so careless, so confident in their power. They didn't see me watching, didn't know I was collecting every detail, every weakness. By the time the last guest left, I was exhausted but resolute. I wouldn't let them break me. Not again. As I cleaned up the empty glasses, my mother approached, her smile gone. Clara, you'll need to do better next time, she said, her voice cold. This family's reputation depends on it. I nodded, swallowing the urge to snap back. She didn't know it yet, but I was done being her pawn. I was done being invisible. The spark of anger had grown into a flame, and I would use it to burn their perfect world to the ground. The days after the party were a haze of quiet rage. I went through the motions: work, errands, the occasional forced smile when my mother called to remind me of some trivial task, but inside, I was unraveling the threads of their world. My family thought they'd won, that their public dressing down of me had cemented their superiority. They didn't know I was already planning my next move, A chess game where I was no longer a pawn but the queen. I'd always been good at keeping secrets, at observing without being noticed. Now, I would turn that skill against them. My first step was to gather evidence. I knew my family's weaknesses, but I needed proof, something undeniable that would expose them for who they were. My mother's affairs were the easiest target. She was discreet, but not careful. Late-night phone calls, mysterious business trips. The way she'd linger too long with certain men at social events, I'd seen it all. I started by accessing her email, a task easier than it should have been. She'd never changed her password from the one I'd set up for her years ago, back when I managed her calendar. What I found was a goldmine: flirty messages, coded references to hotel rooms, even a few incriminating photos she'd carelessly sent to a man named Charles, a wealthy investor who frequented our family's events. I saved everything, my hands steady despite the betrayal twisting in my chest. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about making her face the consequences of her hypocrisy. My father was trickier. Richard was a man of quiet deals, the kind that happened in back rooms and left no paper trail. But I knew his habits. He kept a locked drawer in his study, one he thought was safe from prying eyes. I'd seen him open it once, years ago, when he thought I was asleep. Late one night, while my parents were at another gala, I slipped into the house with the spare key I'd never returned. The lock was old, easy to pick with a hairpin and a YouTube tutorial. Inside, I found what I'd suspected: documents detailing offshore accounts, shady investments, and a ledger that hinted at tax evasion. My father, the respectable businessman, was a fraud. I photographed every page, my heart racing not from fear but from the thrill of discovery. Vanessa was the hardest. She was careful, her public image polished to perfection. But I knew her better than anyone. I knew about the affair she'd had with her professor in law school, the one she'd bribed to keep quiet. I knew about the client she'd overbilled, skimming funds to fuel her designer wardrobe. I couldn't access her current files, she was too paranoid for that, but I remembered a USB drive she'd left at the house years ago, one she'd assumed was lost. I found it in a box of old junk, buried under Christmas decorations. The drive was a treasure trove: emails, receipts, even a draft of a letter to the professor, begging him to stay silent. Copied it all, my anger simmering as I realized how long she'd played the perfect daughter while hiding her sins. Each piece of evidence felt like a brick in the wall I was building, a fortress of truth that would shield me when the time came. But gathering it wasn't enough. I needed a plan, a way to expose them without destroying myself in the process. I couldn't just leak the information, that would be too crude, too easy to dismiss as a scorned daughter's lies. No, I needed something public, something undeniable, something that would hit them where it hurt most: their precious reputation. I started by planting seeds. At the next family dinner, I dropped subtle hints, testing their reactions. "Mom, I saw Charles at the coffee shop today. He asked about you," I said casually, watching her face pale before she forced a smile. "Oh, how sweet of him," she replied, her voice tight. I mentioned a news article about tax fraud to my father, noting how sloppy some businessmen were. He coughed into his wine, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. Vanessa was the most defensive, snapping when I asked about her old professor. Why are you digging up ancient history, Clara? She demanded, her fork clattering against her plate. I shrugged, feigning innocence. But inside, I was exhilarated. They were nervous. They knew something was coming, even if they didn't know what. The thrill of it consumed me. For the first time, I felt powerful, like I was finally in control. But there was a cost. Every night, I lay awake, replaying the party, their laughter, the way they'd made me feel like nothing. The anger kept me going, but it was eating at me too, gnawing at the part of me that still loved them. Despite everything, I wondered if I was becoming someone else, someone harder, someone I wouldn't recognize. But then I'd remember the guests' whispers, the way my mother's almost had cut me open, and I'd push the doubts away. This wasn't just about might, it was about all the times they'd made me feel small. All the years I'd swallowed my pain to keep the family together. I decided the exposure would happen at the next big event, my father's annual charity gala. A night where the city's elite gathered to fawn over his generosity. It was the perfect stage, a mirror of the night they'd humiliated me. I'd spent years in the background, making sure these events ran smoothly. Now, I'd use that knowledge to tear their world apart. I started planning, meticulous and deliberate, every detail calculated to maximize the impact. The gala was 2 months away, giving me time to refine my approach, to ensure there'd be no escape for them. As the weeks passed, I became a ghost in my own life. My focus narrowed to the task at hand. I avoided family gatherings when I could, claiming work deadlines. But when I had to see them, I played my part perfectly quiet. Dutiful Clara, always ready to help. They didn't suspect a thing. Or so I thought. One evening, as I was leaving their house, Vanessa grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "You're acting strange, Clara," she said, her eyes searching mine. "What's going on with you?" I smiled, pulling my arm free. "Nothing's going on," I lied. "Just tired." She didn't believe May could see it in her frown, but she let me go. As I walked to my car, I felt a chill. I was playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than I'd realized. The weeks leading up to the charity gala were a tightrope walk. Every conversation with my family felt like a test, their eyes probing for cracks in my facade. I kept my distance, citing a demanding project at work. But the truth was I was consumed by my plan. The evidence I'd gathered was a ticking bomb, and I spent hours refining how I'd detonate it. The gala wasn't just an event, it was their stage, their shrine to the perfect family they'd crafted for the world. I'd make sure it became their undoing. But the closer I got, the more I felt the weight of what I was doing. This wasn't just revenge. It was a severance, a cutting of ties that had bound me to them my whole life. I wondered if I was ready to lose them, even if they deserved it. My days were spent in a haze of preparation. I rented a small office space downtown, a place where I could work without fear of being discovered. The walls were bare, the desk cluttered with printouts of emails, bank statements, and photos. I mapped out the gala's timeline, from the opening speeches to the silent auction, pinpointing the moment when the room would be most attentive. My father always gave a speech at the gala's peak, a self-congratulatory ode to his philanthropy. That's when I'd strike, when every eye was on him, when the room was full of the city's most influential people. I'd hacked into the venue's AV system before, fixing technical glitches for past events. This time, I'd use that access to project my evidence on the massive screen behind him. A slideshow of their sins for all to see. The technical side was simple enough. I'd created a program to override the AV controls, a task I'd learned from years of troubleshooting my family's events. The harder part was the narrative. I didn't want to just expose them, I wanted the truth to resonate, to make the guests feel the betrayal I'd felt. I wrote a script, a voiceover to accompany the images, my voice calm but unrelenting as it laid bare their lies. My mother's affairs would be first, the emails and photos fading in one by one, her own words damning her. Then my father's financial crimes, the ledger entries and offshore accounts flashing across the screen. Vanessa's scandals would be the final blow, her carefully hidden past exposed in brutal detail. I recorded the voiceover in my office, my voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each take. By the end, I sounded like someone else, someone fearless. But as the gala approached, doubt crept in. What if I was wrong? What if this destroyed more than just their reputation? I thought about my younger brother, Ethan, the only one in the family who'd never hurt me. He was away at college, blissfully unaware of the storm I was brewing. I didn't want him caught in the crossfire, but I couldn't see a way to shield him. I called him one night, just to hear his voice. "Clara, you sound off," he said, his concern cutting through the static of the call. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to tell him, to warn him, but I couldn't. Just work stress. I lied, hating myself for it. He didn't deserve this, but neither did I. I hung up, promising myself I'd find a way to protect him when the time came. My mother called me a week before the gala, her voice syrupy sweet. "Clara, darling, I need you to double-check the guest list. We can't afford any mistakes." I gritted my teeth, agreeing as always, but her words fueled my resolve. She still saw me as her errand girl, the one who'd fix her messes while she took the credit. I spent that night finalizing the slideshow, syncing it to the voiceover, testing it on my laptop until it was flawless. The images were stark, undeniable emails with timestamps, bank statements with circled transactions, Vanessa's letter in her own handwriting. I burned it onto a USB drive, my hands steady now, my doubts buried beneath the weight of my anger. The day of the gala arrived like a storm on the horizon. I dressed carefully, choosing a sleek black gown that made me feel like a weapon. My mother had insisted I attend, oblivious to the threat I posed. As I walked into the venue, the familiar hum of wealth and power greeted my crystal glasses clinking, laughter echoing off marble walls. My father was in his element, shaking hands with donors, his smile as polished as ever. Vanessa flitted through the crowd, her charm on full display, while my mother held court near the stage, her laughter sharp and commanding. I moved through the room like a shadow, checking the AV booth discreetly, ensuring my program was loaded and ready. The technician, an old friend from past events, waved me off with a grin. "All set, Clara. You worry too much." He didn't know what was coming. No one did. As the evening unfolded, I felt a strange calm. The guests were seated. The speeches began, and I stood at the back, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. My father took the stage, his voice booming with false humility as he thanked the crowd for their generosity. I slipped into the AV booth, my USB drive in hand. The technician was distracted, chatting with a caterer, and I plugged in the drive, my fingers flying over the keyboard to initiate the override. The screen behind my father flickered, and for a moment, I thought I'd been caught. But then it began, the first email. My mother's words to Charles glowing in stark white against the dark screen. The room went silent, a collective gasp sucking the air out of the space. My father froze, his mouth open mid-sentence, as the voice-over-me voice began. Ellen Harper, a woman of secrets, hiding behind a perfect smile. The images shifted, each one a hammer blow. My mother's face crumpled, her hand clutching her necklace as if it could save her. Vanessa stood, her chair scraping loudly, her eyes wide with panic. My father tried to speak, to regain control, but the crowd was murmuring now, their shock turning to whispers of judgment. The ledger appeared next, numbers and dates that told a story of greed. My father's face turned ashen, his hands gripping the podium. Vanessa's letter was the final strike, her words to her professor laid bare for all to see. The room erupted, voices rising in a chaotic crescendo. I stood in the booth, my heart racing, watching their world collapse. The gala descended into chaos. Guests whispered furiously, their eyes darting between my family and the screen, where my voice continued its relentless narration. My mother tried to slip toward the exit, but the crowd's attention pinned her in place. Her emerald gown no longer a symbol of elegance but a spotlight on her shame. My father's voice cracked as he stammered. This is a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. But no one was listening. The evidence was too clear, too damning. Vanessa stood frozen, her face a mask of fury and fear, her carefully curated image shattered. I stayed in the AV booth, hidden in the shadows, watching the fallout I'd orchestrated. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful, but it was a hollow kind of power, tinged with something I couldn't yet name. The slideshow ended, the screen fading to black, but the damage was done. Reporters in the crowd were already typing furiously on their phones, their faces alight with the thrill of a scandal. I unplugged the USB drive and slipped out of the booth, blending into the chaos as guests surged toward the exits or clustered in gossiping knots. I caught my mother's eye as I passed, her gaze a mix of betrayal and disbelief. "Clara," she hissed, grabbing my arm. "What have you done?" I pulled free, my voice steady. "What I had to." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But I didn't wait for her response. I walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step a declaration of my freedom. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the gala. I leaned against a pillar, my breath coming in short bursts as the adrenaline faded. I'd done it. I'd exposed them, stripped away their lies, and made them feel the weight of their own hypocrisy. But as the high of victory ebbed, doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? The images of their face-me mother's shock, my father's desperation, Vanessa's rage played on a loop in my mind. They deserved it, I told myself, but the thought didn't erase the ache in my chest. They were still my family, flawed and cruel as they were. And I just burned every bridge between us. The next morning, the headlines screamed, "Harper Family Scandal Rocks Charity Gala." One read. Another called it a betrayal of trust, secrets exposed at elite event. My phone buzzed incessantly, texts from cousins, voicemails from my mother's friends, even a message from Ethan, his voice shaky. "Clara, what happened? Call me." I didn't call him back. I couldn't face him yet. Couldn't explain why I'd done it without breaking down. Instead, I scrolled through the news, each article a confirmation of my success. My mother's affairs were the talk of the town, her social circle buzzing with gossip. My father's business partners were pulling out, their trust shattered by the evidence of his fraud. Vanessa's law firm issued a statement distancing themselves from her, and rumors swirled about an investigation into her past. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt empty. I spent the day in my apartment, the blinds drawn, the world outside a distant hum. I kept expecting the police to knock, to accuse me of hacking or slander, but no one came. The evidence was real. After all, I'd only shown the truth. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that my family was plotting their own counterattack. Vanessa was the first to make a move. She showed up at my door that evening, her face pale but her eyes blazing. "You think you're clever, don't you?" She spat, pushing past me into the apartment. "You think you can ruin us and walk away?" I stood my ground, my voice calm. "You ruined yourselves, Vanessa. I just made sure everyone saw it." She laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You're pathetic, Clara. Always playing the victim. You think this makes you better than us." I didn't answer, just watched her pace, her anger a mirror of my own. "Get out," I said finally, my voice low. She stopped, her eyes narrowing, but she left without another word. My mother called next, her voice a mix of tears and rage. "How could you do this to me, Clara? After everything I've done for you?" I almost laughed at that, the absurdity of her claiming credit for my existence while ignoring how she'd crushed me. "You did this to yourself, Mom," I said, and hung up. My father didn't call. I hadn't expected him to. He was too busy scrambling to save his empire, meeting with lawyers, spinning stories to salvage what was left. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a spectator to the collapse of the life I'd once been part of. But the emptiness grew. I'd wanted justice, but this felt like something else, something darker. I started questioning my motives, wondering if I'd been driven by anger more than righteousness. I thought about Ethan, about the family dinners we'd never have again, about the way my mother used to sing me to sleep when I was a child. Those memories felt like relics now, fragments of a life that no longer existed. I wanted to believe I'd done the right thing, but the cost was higher than I'd imagined. I decided to reach out to Ethan. I needed to know he was okay, needed to explain before he heard it all from someone else. I drove to his college the next day, a 4-hour trip that gave me too much time to think. When I saw him, sitting on a bench outside his dorm, my heart ached. He looked so young, so untouched by the ugliness I'd unleashed. "Clara," he said, standing, his face a mix of relief and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me?" I took a deep breath, the words spilling out about the party, the humiliation, the years of being their scapegoat. He listened, his eyes wide, and when I finished, he hugged me, his arms tight. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know it was that bad." For the first time in days, I cried, the weight of his understanding breaking something open in me. Ethan's hug was a lifeline, a reminder that not all of my family was lost to me. We sat on that bench for hours, the autumn leaves swirling around us as I told him everything, not just the gala, but the years of quiet wounds, the way our parents and Vanessa had shaped me into someone I didn't want to be. He listened without judgment, his face softening with every word. "I always thought you were the strong one," he said finally, his voice quiet. "You held us together." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I was just surviving, Ethan." He nodded, and in that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I hadn't destroyed everything. Maybe there was still something worth saving. But the world outside our bubble was unforgiving. The scandal was everywhere: newspapers, social media, even a segment on the local news. My family's name, once synonymous with prestige, was now a punchline. My mother had gone silent, her social calendar empty for the first time in years. My father's company was under investigation, the IRS circling like vultures. Vanessa had been suspended from her firm, her future uncertain. I followed the fallout from my apartment, my phone a constant stream of notifications. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, some offering sympathy, others fishing for gossip. I ignored them all, my focus narrowing to what came next. I'd exposed them, but I hadn't planned for the aftermath, for the void left behind when revenge was done. I started to notice changes in myself. The anger that had fueled me was fading, replaced by a restless need to understand why I'd done it. Was it really about justice? Or was it about proving I was more than their punching bag? I spent nights poring over old family photos, searching for clues to who we'd been before the lies took over. There was one picture: Ethan and Vanessa at the beach, our parents laughing in the background. We looked happy, like a real family. I couldn't remember when things had changed, when love had turned to obligation, when loyalty had become a weapon. A week after the gala, I got a letter from my mother. Not a call, not a text, but a handwritten note, the kind she used to send to donors or clients. It was formal, almost cold, but the words carried a weight I hadn't expected. "Clara, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need you to know I'm sorry. Not for what you think I did, but for how I made you feel. I was wrong." I read it over and over, searching for sincerity, for a hint of the mother I'd once adored. But the words felt hollow, like an attempt to salvage her image rather than a genuine apology. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Vanessa was less subtle. She showed up at my office, her face drawn, her usual polish gone. "You've ruined everything," she said, her voice shaking. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I leaned back in my chair, meeting her gaze. I showed the truth. "Vanessa, that's all." She laughed, a bitter sound. "The truth? You think you're some kind of hero? You're just as broken as the rest of us." Her words stung, But I didn't let her see it. Maybe, I said. But I'm not hiding anymore. She left without another word. But her accusation lingered. Was I broken? Had I become the thing I had, a manipulator? A destroyer? I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the questions. My job at a small marketing firm had always been a refuge. A place where I was valued for my skills. Not my last name. But even there, the scandal followed me. Colleagues whispered. Clients asked pointed questions. Kept my head down, focusing on campaigns and deadlines. But the isolation was suffocating. I started to wonder if I'd traded one prison for another. Then came the call from my father. It was late, the kind of hour where only bad news travels. His voice was rough, tired. Clara, we need to talk. I braced myself, expecting anger, but instead, he sounded defeated. I didn't know it was this bad for you, he said. I should have seen it. I didn't know how to respond. My father had never been the one to apologize. Never the one to admit fault. I don't want your pity, I said finally. I just wanted you to see me. There was a long silence, then a sigh. I see you now, he said, and hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone, my chest tight. Was this what I'd wanted? Acknowledgement, not destruction. I started to question my endgame. I'd exposed them, but what did I want now? Their ruin, their remorse, or something else entirely. I thought about redemption not just for them, but for me. I'd spent so long defining myself by their failures, their cruelty. Maybe it was time to let go, to build something new. I reached out to Ethan again, asking him to meet me at the old family cabin, a place we'd gone as kids before everything fell apart. I needed to see if we could start over, if we could be a family without the lies. When I arrived at the cabin, Ethan was already there, sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee. He smiled, but it was cautious, like he wasn't sure what to expect. You okay? He asked. I nodded, sitting beside him. I don't know what happens next, I admitted, but I want to try. For us. He looked at me, his eyes searching, and then he nodded. Me too. We sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the trees, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. The cabin was a time capsule, its walls lined with memories of a family that no longer existed. Ethan and I spent the weekend there, talking, laughing, sometimes crying. It was the first time in years we'd been honest with each other. No pretense. No expectations. He told me about his life at college, his dreams of becoming a teacher, his fear of being tainted by our family's name. I told him about the party, the years of swallowing my pain, the moment I decided to fight back. He didn't judge me, didn't call me a hero or a villain. He just listened, and that was enough. But the world outside the cabin wasn't so forgiving. The scandal had taken on a life of its own, fueled by social media and tabloid speculation. My mother's affairs were dissected in gossip columns. My father's business dealings scrutinized by federal investigators. Vanessa had gone quiet, her social accounts deleted, her presence erased from the city's elite circles. I followed the news with a detached curiosity, like watching a storm I'd unleashed but no longer controlled. Part of me wanted to reach out, to see if they were okay. But another part, the part that still burned with anger, kept me silent. I returned to the city with a new resolve. Revenge had been my weapon, but it couldn't be my future. I needed to rebuild, to find out who I was without my family's shadow. I started small, signing up for a painting class I'd always wanted to try, meeting friends I'd neglected for years. I even began therapy, something I'd resisted for too long. The sessions were raw, painful, but they helped me untangle the knots of guilt and anger that had defined me for so long. My therapist, a kind woman with sharp eyes, asked me what I wanted. Not what I wanted to destroy, but what I wanted to create. I didn't have an answer yet, but the question stayed with me, a seed planted in the wreckage of my old life. My mother reached out again, this time with an invitation to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, far from the glittering venues she usually frequented. She looked different, older, her face bare of makeup, her eyes red-rimmed. "Clara," she began, her voice soft, "I need you to understand. I never meant to hurt you." I wanted to believe her, but the memory of her laughter at the party, the way she'd turned my efforts into a punchline, was too fresh. "You didn't mean to, but you did," I said. "Every time you made me feel small. You chose to." She flinched, her hands twisting in her lap. "I was wrong," she said. "I was so caught up in being perfect. I forgot how to be a mother." I didn't respond, letting her words hang between us. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Vanessa was harder. She sent an email, short and clipped, demanding a meeting. I chose neutral ground, a park near my apartment, where we could talk without an audience. She showed up in jeans, her hair pulled back, a far cry from the polished lawyer I knew. "You think you've won," she said, her voice low. "But you've just made us all miserable." I shook my head. "This isn't about winning, Vanessa. It's about stopping the lies." She scoffed, but there was no fire in it. "You don't get it, Clara. You think you're above us, but you're just as bad. You used our secrets to hurt us." Her words cut deeper than I expected, echoing the doubts I'd been wrestling with. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm done hiding who I am." She stared at me, her expression unreadable, then turned and walked away. My father was the last to reach out. He asked me to meet him at his office, a place I'd always associated with his power. But when I arrived, the office was half empty, papers stacked in boxes, the air heavy with defeat. "I'm selling the company," he said, not meeting my eyes. "It's the only way to avoid jail." I nodded, unsure what to say. He looked at me then, his face lined with regret. "I failed you, Clara. I saw what they did to you, and I let it happen." His admission hit me harder than I expected, cracking open a wound I'd thought was healed. "Why didn't you stop it?" I asked, my voice breaking. He shook his head. "I don't know. I was weak." We sat in silence, the weight of his words filling the room. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. But I saw him differently, not as the untouchable patriarch, but as a flawed, broken man. As I left his office, I felt a shift. The anger that had driven me was fading, replaced by a cautious hope. I didn't want to carry their sins anymore. Didn't want to be defined by their mistakes. I started to focus on my own life, my own dreams. I took on more responsibility at work, pitching ideas I'd always been too scared to share. I reconnected with old friends, laughing over coffee like I hadn't in years. I even started painting again, my canvases filled with bold colors, a reflection of the person I was becoming. Ethan was my anchor through it all. We talked every week, planning a trip to the cabin for the holidays. Just the two of us. He was still processing the scandal, still grappling with what it meant to be a Harper. But he was trying. "We'll figure it out," he said one night over the phone. Together. That word together felt like a promise, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Months passed, and the scandal began to fade from the headlines, replaced by newer, shinier dramas. My family's name still carried a stain, but the world moved on, as it always does. I moved on too, slowly, deliberately, building a life that felt like mine. Work became a refuge. My colleagues respect a balm for the wounds I'd carried too long. I was promoted to lead a new campaign, project I poured my heart into, proving to myself that I was more than my family's shadow. My paintings filled my apartment, each one a step toward the person I wanted to be. But the past wasn't done with me yet. My mother called one morning, her voice tentative. "Clara, I'm selling the house," she said. "I thought you should know. The house, our family home, the backdrop of every memory, good and bad, was being let go, a casualty of the scandal's fallout." I drove out to see it one last time, walking through the empty rooms, the echoes of my childhood ringing in my ears. My mother was there, packing boxes, her movements slow and deliberate. "Do you hate me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought about it, really thought about it. "No," I said finally. "But I don't trust you." She nodded, her eyes glistening, and we worked in silence, packing away the pieces of a life we'd both lost. Vanessa reached out next, a text message that caught me off guard. "Can we talk? No fighting. Just talk." I agreed, meeting her at the same park. She looked different, calmer, less guarded. "I'm leaving the city," she said. "Starting over somewhere new." I nodded, surprised by the relief I felt. "I'm sorry it came to this," I said, "and I meant it." She looked at me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "I'm sorry too. For everything." It wasn't forgiveness. Not fully. But it was a step. We parted with a hug, awkward but genuine, and I watched her walk away, wondering if we'd ever be sisters again. My father was the hardest. He'd avoided me since our last meeting, but I heard through Ethan that he'd moved to a smaller apartment, his empire reduced to ashes. I decided to visit him, unannounced, needing closure. He opened the door, looking older than I'd ever seen him, his eyes tired but clear. "Clara," he said, stepping aside to let me in. The apartment was sparse, a far cry from the mansion he'd once ruled. We talked for hours, about the past, about the mistakes we'd both made. I'm proud of you, he said at one point, his voice breaking. You stood up for yourself. I never did. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, my throat tight. When I left, I felt lighter, like I'd finally let go of the weight of his approval. Ethan and I kept our promise, spending Christmas at the cabin. It was quiet, just the two of us, a fire crackling in the hearth as we talked about the future. He was applying to grad school, determined to carve his own path. I told him about my promotion, my paintings, the person I was becoming. You're different now, he said, smiling. Stronger. I smiled back, feeling the truth of it. I wasn't the Clara who'd stood trembling at my mother's party. Wasn't the Clara who'd lived for their approval. I was someone new, someone I was still discovering. But redemption isn't a straight line. There were days when the guilt crept back, when I wondered if I'd been too harsh, too vengeful. I'd see a photo of my mother in the society pages, her smile forced, or hear about Vanessa's new life in a small town, and the questions would return. Had I done the right thing? Could I have found another way? My therapist helped me navigate those doubts, reminding me that my actions had come from pain, but also from strength. You chose to survive, she said. Now choose to live. I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching art to kids who reminded me of myself, quiet, overlooked, full of dreams they were afraid to chase. Felt good to give back, to build something positive from the ashes of my anger. One day, a girl in my class showed me a painting she'd done, a vibrant swirl of colors that made me smile. It's about being free, she said shyly. I nodded, my eyes stinging. It's beautiful, I told her, and I meant it. As spring approached, I felt a shift. The anger that had defined me was gone, replaced by a quiet determination to keep moving forward. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. Didn't need their validation to feel whole. I had Ethan, my work, my art, and a growing sense of self that no one could take away. I still thought about the gala, about the moment their world had crumbled. But it no longer felt like a victory or a loss. It was just a moment, a turning point that had led me here. I wrote a letter to my family, not to send, but to release. I poured out everything, the pain, the anger, the love I still felt despite it all. I burned it in the cabin's fireplace, watching the flames consume the words, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. I was done carrying their sins. I was done carrying my own. The first anniversary of the gala came and went, a quiet milestone I marked alone. I stood in my apartment, surrounded by my paintings, and thought about how far I'd come. The Clara who'd stood humiliated in that dining hall was a ghost now, a memory of a woman who'd believed she was nothing without her family's approval. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was stronger, not because I'd torn them down, but because I'd built myself up. Ethan visited that weekend, his laughter filling my apartment as we cooked dinner together. He was thriving in grad school, his passion for teaching infectious. You should come visit, he said, grinning. Meet my friends. They'd love you. I smiled, promising I would. For the first time, I believed in a future where we could be a family, just the two of us, if that's what it took. My mother sent a card a few weeks later, A simple note congratulating me on my promotion. "I'm proud of you," she wrote. And this time, the words felt genuine. I didn't respond, but I kept the card, tucking it into a drawer. Maybe one day I'd call her. Maybe we'd find a way to rebuild. Or maybe we wouldn't. I was okay with either outcome. Vanessa reached out too. A brief email about her new life in a small coastal town. "It's quiet here," she wrote. "I'm learning to be someone else." I wished her well, meaning it, but I didn't expect us to be close again. Some wounds heal, but they leave scars. My father was the last to reconnect. He invited me to coffee, a gesture so ordinary it felt surreal. We met at a diner, his hands wrapped around a mug, his eyes softer than I remembered. "I'm trying to be better," he said. "Not just for you, but for me." I nodded, unsure if I believed him, but willing to listen. We talked about small things, me job, his new apartment, the weather. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a start. I kept painting, my canvases growing bolder, more confident. My art classes at the community center became a highlight of my week. The kids' enthusiasm a reminder of why I'd fought so hard to be free. One evening, as I cleaned up after a class, a girl handed me a drawing a stick figure with my smile, standing under a bright sun. "That's you," she said. "You're happy." I hugged her, my heart full. She was right. I was happy, not because I'd won, but because I'd survived. The scandal was a distant memory now, a story people told over drinks, a cautionary tale about pride and secrets. My family was rebuilding, each in their own way, but I no longer felt responsible for their redemption. I'd done what I needed to do, not just for justice, but for myself. I'd exposed their lies, but more importantly, I'd exposed my own strength. One night, I stood on my balcony, the city lights sprawling before me. I thought about the party, about the guests' laughter, about the moment I'd decided to fight back. Felt like a lifetime ago. A chapter in a book I'd finally closed. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need their approval. I had my own life, my own purpose, my own light. As I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. A photo of him at the cabin, grinning by the lake. "Come back soon," he texted. "We've got more memories to make." I smiled, typing a quick reply. "Count me in." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, ready for whatever came next. The past was gone, the future unwritten, and for the first time, I was free to write it myself.